Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back. It's Magdk Gamer. If you're stopping by and watching the video, feel free to hit the like button and the follow button when you come in. I appreciate everybody that follows me. If you're looking for some live Battleground no CP content, feel free to check me out on Twitch at MGTOW Gamer. I stream pretty regularly. I do a lot of Battlegrounds. I play all classes, all builds, all styles, whether you're looking for stamina builds, hybrid builds, Magdk builds, I do it all. Feel free to check me out. Appreciate it. Appreciate everybody who follows. For this discussion, I was talking about the changes to the Magdk for the upcoming Elsweyr patch. I've been playing Magdk since release. It's been a lot of ups and downs with the classes, and for the next patch they've finally made some sort of adjustments to Molten Whip. For the longest time nobody really used Molten Whip. I think at some point it became like a little PvE option and then it quickly disappeared. So for the next patch, Molten Whip is going to be getting a buff. So basically every time when you have Molten Whip on your bar, whenever you use any of the abilities within the Ardent Flame ability, you're going to get a buff that increases both the Molten Whip by 33% up to 3 times. So for example, if I hit Burning Embers and Engulfing, that will increase my next Molten Whip by 66% because I use 2 abilities. Of course, if I were to hit Cauterize, or if I were to Gap Close Embers, Gap Close Fiery Breath and Embers, that would make my Molten Whip hit for an extra 100% damage. With that said, in my opinion, that ability is not actually going to be very viable for Magdk, at the very least for a solo Magdk. If you're a Magdk that likes to maybe do some solo open world, the 1vxing, I don't even think maybe in controlled small scale, but the reality is if you're going to be giving up Molten Whip, if you're going to be giving up Flame Lash for Molten Whip, you're going to be losing an enormous amount of healing, which the DK will struggle. The reason being, I'm going to talk a little bit about how a rotation would work, right? So it's important to keep in mind that the changes to the dots for next patch is going to be when you Ember Swipe, and this is also going to affect your healing for next patch as well, right? So when you would hit someone with Burning Embers, it would proc the upfront damage that you can see right there of 4478, and then immediately you would gain the 1 tick. So when you were if you were running like a Sword and Shield and you were just turtling for a second and you would Ember Swipe and then block for a second, Ember Swipe again, because it's too damn expensive to use a coagulating breath during any time that you weren't in essence at execute range, because it's just entirely too expensive for what it's meant to do. And so instead DKs would Burning Ember Swipe to gain the heal, because the heal is based on the damage. So now what happens is that there's going to be like a 1 or 2 second delay between the upfront damage and then the tick that you would get. So of course now that duration you now have to wait. So the Burning Embers spam for double swiping, of course, is going to be reduced. The amount of damage is going to be reduced, and of course in return your healing is going to be reduced. So it's actually going to force you to preemptively use the ability, and of course double Ember Swiping will have its healing reduced. The reason being is because the developers felt that the dot damage was a little too bursty. They even mentioned this in the comments in relation to this ability, that the reason why they did that is because it was going to reduce the burst. That's important to understand, because that will also reduce your healing on double Ember Swipe for when you want to, instead of using a coag, because coag is just too damn expensive to use. You're gonna find that your heals are gonna be a little bit weaker. Now on top of that, if you're also gonna be dropping Flame Lash for Molten Whip, your heals are going to be dramatically reduced. And DK in a 1vx scenario struggles to heal outside of anything where it's not perma blocking. The reason being, if you run a Destro Staff, you run light armor, you run dual wield, or you run Destro Staff, you're going to find yourself taking a lot more damage. I know most DKs understand the double Ember Swipe for the purpose of healing. If you drop Flame Lash for Molten Whip, you will find yourself dying more often. The other thing behind that is that these abilities, in essence, were never made to be spam. Their duration is meant to run out. They're 10 seconds. Both abilities are 10 seconds. So there's the other important thing is that within the Ardent Flame skill tree, the other two abilities are not spammable. Most DKs don't even use Empowering Chains. So the only other ability that you could use is Cauterize or Flames of Oblivion, and obviously you're not spamming either one of those. So in essence, the only two abilities within this tree to proc that new passive that's going to give you both extra damage to your Molten Whip, as well as a small buff of 125 spell damage and physical damage. That stacks 3 times, it lasts 5 seconds, and it refreshes. In my opinion, the developer just doesn't understand how Magdk works. Magdk is designed to whittle down their opponent. They're meant to be the warrior that is up front that wins the battle of attrition. Now, DK dots, in my opinion, are terrible. They last too long. They do entirely too little damage. But with that said, it's important to understand that even on a light armor build, like I'm running, this is a heavy armor build, and so as you can see, for me to just one time to cast this rotation of Engulfing and Burning Embers, it cost me 4,000 Magdk. Now most DKs in no CP battlegrounds are running around maybe between 29 and like 30, let's just say 32k, maybe even 33k if you're really pushing max Magdk. So if you're running a light armor build, it's probably going to cost you about 800 for Burning Embers, and this will be, I think, around 2k, I forget. So just to spam these two abilities is going to cost you about 3,000 Magdk. Now from the developer standpoint, to gain the major bonus to Molten Whip, you need to in essence hit one of these abilities twice, right? Because you're gonna Engulfing. So the cheaper ability is to swipe is going to be Burning Embers. So in a light armor build, it's going to cost you about 1,700 to cast this twice, and then of course the 2,000 for Engulfing. So that's 3,000 to gain the full bonus to your next Molten Whip. Correct? So if that is in essence is going to be your new rotation, meaning you're going to be sit there and multicasting, Engulfing, and double swiping, or at least repeating that rotation many times, the only thing that's going to happen is that you're going to run dry, right? DK already struggles with sustain because their abilities cost entirely too much, and many of their abilities do only one or maybe two useful things, right? So for example, if I use, most gap closers either do an exorbitant amount of damage, i.e. critical rush, or they automatically CC when they gap close, like the Templar CC, right? The what's it called? The not this the one that I forget what's it called. Anyway, so that ability automatically crowd controls, and it does a really good amount of damage. It does more damage than chains. So in essence, I have to run two abilities to do what the Templar ability does in just one, because it does much better damage, and on top of that, it CCs. Whereas I have a CC that gives me, for some reason, gives me Major Expedition. This ability doesn't make sense at all, because in the Ardent Flame ability, once you hit somebody with an Ardent Flame ability, it procs Warmth, which reduces their speed by 30%. But then on top of that, it gives me an extra 30% when you gap close. Often what happens is that you end up overshooting your target because you end up moving too fast, because he's moving through 33%, 30% slower, you're moving 30% faster, and then you gap closing to him. A lot of times what happens is that you end up overshooting, and then you got to turn your camera around to begin fighting the character. That happens quite often. So in my opinion, I don't see why this ability has a major expedition attached to it. I find that portion of the ability useless, because if you needed to, in essence, you didn't, in essence, close the gap, you can just reuse the ability. You know, Magdk has no inherent mobility, and most DKs don't use chains, so most DKs don't have mobility. So with that said, going back into the sustain issue, is that the only abilities that give you sustain is Battle Roar. Battle Roar is only, in essence, active. Like most other classes either have like cost reduction or like 10 or 5 or 15% to either one or all of their regen stats. The only time that this ability in this passive is actually useful is when you use an ultimate. Most DKs hold their ult either when they're low on resources or they use it as an execute. So in essence, most DKs end up holding their ult longer, and then it diminishes the return that you get from Battle Roar, which i.e. reduces the overall sustain, which is why I don't play that way. As soon as I have my ult up, I typically will just go ahead and use it, or I will save for a more expensive ult so that I'm not diminishing the return that I get from Battle Roar. The other issue is that when you're playing the not the combustion passive, actually yes, the combustion passive only applies about 200 Magdk regen, and of course that's only when you have the burning status effect on somebody. So it's a yet another conditional source of regen. It's roughly 200 per second. It procs twice in the course of once, every 5 seconds for either Magdk or stamina. Of course, if you're using like Noxious Breath and the other swipe, it would, for a Stam DK, it would return stamina, which makes no sense because not only are both of those abilities 25% cheaper because of World and Flames, but then on top of that, stamina already is 15% cheaper in its base. Then Stam DK gets another 25% reduction to its main 2 dots, and then on top of that, it gains the combustion passive. It's like the real person who needed the cost reduction was the Magdk DK, not the Stam DK. This doesn't make sense, because if you play Magdk, I watch a lot of Magdks play, especially even if you run light armor. They run light armor, destro, and they even have LA drain on their bar, and they still end up running dry. And it's entirely because, one, DK abilities cost way too much. Two, DKs don't have an execute, and that's exactly what the developers are trying to do. They're trying to give the DK a sort of pseudo execute, just because they don't want to give the character a regular execute. They're coming up with this convoluted sort of rotation that you're meant to now multi-spam abilities that are designed to be damage over time. And it just doesn't make any sense, because as a DK you will struggle with sustain if you're going to be running those abilities. In essence, you're going to be multi-swiping and multi-casting, engulfing. It's going to affect your sustain, I guarantee you. With that said, they're making a change to how Flames of Oblivion works. I find it to be a good change. It will gain a little bit more damage because it will hit an extra target. In my opinion, I wish Flames of Oblivion could be given a sort of execute sort of ability or passive to work the same way Corrosive works. Corrosive is a smart heal. It hits the lowest target and gives them the HP burst. Make Flames of Oblivion work the same way. So that when you're, in essence, how Magdk often finds itself in scenarios where it's surrounded by multiple opponents, when you use Flames of Oblivion and you're getting someone low and you CC them and you double whip them, and then they might dodge roll after, and then the flame ball from Flame of Oblivion will target that person, because in essence DK has no execute. So in essence, Flames of Oblivion can act like an execute, because often what will happen is somebody will like gap close to you or shield charge you, or you're fighting multiple people, so the person who is in essence lower HP will start to move away. And most DKs don't have a gap closer, and they've already finished CCing their opponent. They have no way to, in essence, execute that opponent, i.e. outside of a leap. And so this would help DKs to secure more kills. If you really don't want to give it an execute, in essence, change how Flames of Oblivion works so that it always targets the lowest health person. That, in my opinion, would be an excellent change. I know they're buffing and powering change for next patch, because it does do a lot less damage than the Templar version. I think it is about 30 or so % weaker than the Templar version, and leaps and bounds weaker than things like Critical Rush. Another change that they're making is to the damage ticks from, like I said, all the dots are in essence going to do damage, pause, and then initiate their dot. And of course, this will always pose a problem for Magdk when it initiates combat. So whenever you initiate combat, which just doesn't make sense, because the DK is designed to be the dot class, and now all of their dot damage is delayed. So I just want you to keep that in mind, right? If this is a class with multiple dots and it's designed to, in essence, whittle its opponent down, and when you add a delay to all of its dots, you are in essence adding delays to their damage rotation. So now all of your damage is now coming in a second or two later every time you initiate combat. Every time your dot drops and you recast it, the amount of damage that you're doing is in essence now delayed. Just keep that in mind. Next change that they're making, and which in my opinion is the wrong change, which is to reflect the scales. Before that, they are buffing Coag by 19%. In my opinion, they should change the Major Fortitude. Is entirely useless. Everybody uses some sort of a pot that gives you HP, especially in PvP. This is not used really in PvE, except for the green dragon blood morph by tanks. Most in PvE don't use Coag because you can Ember Swipe and Power Lash. And then if you're running, of course, in Trials, you are typically Ember spamming and you have a healer, so most DKs in PvE don't use Coag. This was a PvP change, but it's still not enough. They should drop the Major Fortitude and in essence take that 33%, and so the new heal would be 20% stronger, and then you can have it so that it gives you X amount of healing and then an additional 33% of that over 6 seconds. The reason being is because there is no other ability outside of Volatile Armor that procs the Burning Heart passive for the extra % heal. Nothing. Not the damage from Talons, not the Major Fortitude from Coag, not Wings, not Draw Essence, nothing. Nothing else procs this passive except for this. So if you're a Magdk light armor who maybe utilizes shields and you don't have room on your bar for Volatile Armor, you have no way to proc the Burning Heart passive. So if you in essence were to do that and make that change and give the heal to Coag a heal over time, because DK doesn't have a heal over time, which is what separates Magdk from Stamina, is that Stamina has all of these heal over times from things like Vigor and Rally, and of course the burst heal from Rally, which is why while Stamina is in essence fighting, it has these heal over times that are running even when they get, you know, CC'd or they take damage. They have these healing ticks that are going off, and that's kind of what separates Stamina from Magdk, is that a lot of Magdk abilities don't have heal over time, and especially the Magdk, because the only heal over time that you have is 2 seconds, and it has a cooldown of a minimum of 3 seconds. Very important to understand that the heal from Flame Lash goes on cooldown. It's the only ability in the game that has a cooldown added to it. Also, it's the only ability in the game that has this ridiculous setup. It requires you to either root or stun your opponent, and they have to whip that opponent while they're root or CC'd, and then you gain access to the Power Lash. So if that person uses like an immobility pot and you do not use talent, you have no way to gain access to Power Lash, which in my opinion is a mistake. It should work as soon as you CC or root somebody instead of having to double proc, and then that would in essence increase Magdk's damage output, which it lacks by comparison. Again, comparison to all other classes, and I'm not talking about in a 1v1 scenario. The game is not designed around 1v1, it's designed around group play. And so even in group play, Magdk lacks a lot of damage because most of its abilities are damage over time. Of course, they can be cleansed, or they can be cloaked. Like almost all the DK dots between Talons and Burning Embers and Engulfing, the Burning passive, if you're fighting a Mag Blade or a Stam Blade, all of that damage just gets cloaked. It just does 0 damage. If you're fighting a Templar, the Templar just cleanses it away like you never did anything, and you waste so much Magdk. In my opinion, that has been needed a long time change. With that said, in my opinion, this is what Coag leads. The reason being is because if you were to compare this to the single target heal from the other stand your ground build, i.e. Templar, the Honor the Dead heal is like 150% stronger than Coag, and it's 60% cheaper, because you really don't use coagulating blood unless you're like literally within execute range, because the heal is based, the secondary portion is based off of your missing health. So if you use it when you're like at 75%, you're getting like a 4k heal for, in essence, 4,300 if you're running heavy. In light armors, this costs about 3,600. So it literally becomes a point for point heal. I'll show you a little clip so that you can see. I've tested it even when I was literally I was in the hundreds of HP, and someone heal debuffed me, and I got a 4k heal. I was literally at like 400 or 500 HP. I pressed my Coag and I got 4k, and it cost me 3,500 or 3,600 Magdk to use it. It's typically why you see most Magdk's double cast it. It's very expensive. Keep in mind, if you're playing no CP Battlegrounds and it costs you about 3,500 if you're running a light armor build, you're usually running around 30,000. So you're spending 7,000 Magdk just to get a decent heal. That's ridiculous, because the Templar version of Honor of the Dead can be used the moment you touch below 75% HP, and you're going to get a bigger heal, because the heal, the base of the heal is almost 50% stronger than Coag, and it has the option to heal a friendly target. And this is why I think Coag needs a bigger buff than what they're giving it in just the extra 19%. It needed a buff a long time ago, but the buff that they're giving it is just not enough, especially for a DK who's going to be giving up the heals from Power Lash. You will find yourself running dry, because you're going to be spamming these two abilities more just to gain the extra damage from Molten Whip, and then you're going to end up being forced running Coag, and you're going to end up running Dry very often. Changes to Reflective Plate, in my opinion, are the wrong changes. I was talking about this the other day. It's very important to understand the 50% reduction, right? It's going to push DKs into running Sword and Shield, right? The reason being is because, I know I didn't even get the rest of my passive. I need some more skill points. The reason being is because what really helps DKs is that they end up in scenarios where they're surrounded by multiple opponents. So you end up having multiple people trying to CC you at the same time. And that's primarily what Wings helps you to do, is to help you to secure a kill when you would otherwise be CC'd by a ranged attack. So with the changes to Wings now no longer reflecting, this will also reduce the amount of damage output, which is what the developers are trying to change with the Molten Whip, is trying to make up for that damage drop. In my opinion, I am not going to be switching to Molten Whip. I don't find it will be viable. Sure, it might be viable in like dueling scenarios where you can Ember Span and kind of drop certain abilities that you wouldn't need for open world or for group play. But you will find yourself running Dry more often if you do, because you'll be forced to spamming Burning Embers and engulfing more often than they're needed. So what's going to happen is, right, the ability is going to change. It's not going to reflect. It's going to remain the same. Dragon Fire Scales, instead of doing additional damage, will shoot a little projectile once every second, every time you get hit by a projectile. And then the other morph will stay the same. Will still give you the immobilization and snare immunity for the duration. And so what we'll do, it would actually last the duration. It will give you 50% reduction to all ranged attacks. Right, so you gain 50% from using Wings. Base block is 50%. Whenever you block an ability, it's reduced by 50%. Then on top of that, if you're running a Sword and Shield, which I would see no reason not to next patch, you gain additional damage reduction from Deflect Bolts, which is another 15% added to the 50% base from block, and then an additional 50% of the remaining damage from Reflective Plate. So for all you people who are like, fuck Wings, I'm tired of that shit reflecting, especially you know, Destro, Resto, Mag Blades, you will find yourself fighting DKs who use Sword and Shield, and you will do no damage. Be careful what you ask for. When you ask developers to have shit nerfed, you may open up a Pandora's box. And this is what I mean, that we unfortunately don't have developers that PvP at a high level and understand how much shit goes through Wings, how often Wings fails. Even when I have Wings up and I still eat a snipe out of nowhere, or the crushing shock damage along with the passive dot damage that typically happens from either like burning or the concussion that will proc, or the minor maim from the frost, the curse. There's so many times where I'm like running away and I pop Wings and I still my HP just drops because there's so many things that go through Wings. Bird spam. Will bird spam now be reduced by 50%? Thank the gods, because you just take full damage from that shit. Will crushing shock now be reduced by 50%? Hooray. Rip Sorks. Like I said, be careful what you ask for. You might not enjoy what you get. In my opinion, deep breath, the inhale needs a change. There is nothing in the game at this point worthwhile that is worth interrupting. Back in the days, you used to be able to interrupt the cast time of Uppercut. You used to be able to interrupt Flurry. You used to be able to interrupt snipe, used to be able to interrupt things like soul assault. If it had a cast time, inhale, deep breath would be able to interrupt it, and of course you'd gain the off balance for extra power lashes. Since there's so many abilities now that you can't interrupt, they should just make it so that deep breath in essence stuns on its initial hit, so that you can guarantee the secondary damage. Especially because when you're using things like deep breath along with talents is designed to give a character, a class that is designed as a frontline, stand your ground build, the ability to multi-CC opponents instead of having to, when you're fighting more than one opponent, your only other source of CC comes from using things like either fossilized shattering rocks. So he has to be CC'd, he's got to get CC'd, he's got to get CC'd. That in essence causes a lot of waste of max magicka for the DK. So in group fights or in scenarios where the DK is surrounded by multiple opponents, this would in essence give the DK that breath of relief that it needs by multi-CCing opponents to get to then go right into a talent, CC everybody, and they get the secondary explosion guaranteed, because typically when you talents, people automatically dodge roll away from you, and then you end up missing the secondary explosion from deep breath. In my experience and in my opinion, draw essence should be changed so that the secondary portion, instead of returning 10%, will give the DK the minor magicka steal, so that DKs will have a little bit of a buff to their sustain when fighting multiple opponents, because you wouldn't cast or use draw essence in things like 1v1s or dueling because it's just too expensive for what it does. The heal is very mediocre, which is another point I'm going to touch on in a minute. So even if you're running a good amount of spell damage, you're lucky if draw essence reaches 3k. This is important to understand, even in CP. With a 3k draw essence, that damage is in essence cut in half. It's 1500 damage that hits your opponent, and of course the healing is based off the damage. So even at 3000, you're fighting multiple opponents, it only heals you for less than 1500, because that 1500 is before mitigation. And so you end up with this ridiculously lackluster heal. But the purpose of deep breath is to give you a heal when you are surrounded by multiple opponents. It takes upwards of 4 players to gain almost an equivalent of the base of Coag with draw essence. So in my experience, they should change draw essence to work like the Magicka debt. The secondary portion, it says each enemy within this bomb's radius increases the damage by 25% up to a maximum of 250, so that the more opponents that are around you, the stronger inhale gets, and then the stronger, of course, the heal gets, because the heal is based off of the initial damage. The secondary explosion will then offer minor magicka steal, so that when you're not being forced to multi-spam draw essence to gain back some sort of magicka. And so when all of your other abilities, for example, your burning embers and your engulfing, and if you're running talents, when all those other abilities are now in essence doing damage, you're gaining back the extra magicka from the minor magicka steal, which would benefit DK especially in the scenario of being in an XV1 scenario, which is typically where Magicka DK finds itself. And so this, in essence, would be in line with the winning the war of attrition and whittling down your opponents, because this ability wouldn't be used and abused in a 1v1 setting, but it would be useful in XV1 scenarios where the DK finds himself outnumbered. So the DK can go the route of deep breath for the stun, to, in essence, gain the pressure relief that it needs when it's surrounded by multiple opponents, or it can go the route of sustain. The other change that they made was to Eruption. I don't know anybody who uses this ability. It is far too expensive for what it does. It was useful back in the days when Cinderstorm would give you the evasion. And so in essence, DK could stand its ground because while it stood in here, it had major evasion, which would reduce the amount of damage that it took because it was taking damage from range. So you, in essence, you had an option. If you didn't use wings, then you could use Cinderstorm. The heal is ridiculously lackluster on this ability. They did boost it. Its primary problem is that it costs way too much and it does way too little. Still not useful. They did make changes to it. Maybe it's useful in PvE. It is entirely useless in PvE. Nobody uses it. Probably no one will use it next patch either. They made a little change to, they rounded off Corrosive Magma Shell. In my opinion, they should reduce the cost of Magma Shell. It has a 200 base. I'm using a ult reduction. That's why it's 170. It's a 200 base, and I've tested it multiple times, and the damage reduction often fails. I've tested it over the course on my Magdk as well on my Magdk, which is why I created this particular build, was to be a very brawler-esque type build with utilizing Magma Shell. Didn't work because Magma Shell doesn't work. It typically fails often. Sometimes it'll work, most of the time it does not. Both versions. I tested the Stam version, I tested the Magdk version, they both fail. In my opinion, the base should be reduced to like 170 and it should be given major protection. Call it a day. The developers have a hard time fixing the ability. Go the easy route, keep it simple, stupid, as they say. Reduce the cost to 170 or 160 and give the ability major protection. For some reason, the class that is designed as a frontline, stand your ground build has nothing in its kit in the way of damage reduction except for Iron Skin, which is only useful when you're blocking. Like I was saying before, if you're going to be using a sword and shield next patch, you gain 50% reduction base from blocking, an additional 15% for projectiles, an additional 50%, and then of course with Iron Skin an additional 10. It's a lot of damage reduction. It scales multiplicatively and not additively, and not by addition. And so that's going to be a lot of reduction to ranged attacks. There is no reason next patch for Magdk not to go back to sword and shield for next patch. So with that, I think there were no other worthwhile changes. They made some changes to the durations, and they should really do something with molten armaments. If you played way back when the game first came out, molten armaments, the secondary portion, gave everybody that it buffed flame damage on, I believe, all of their attacks or just their light attacks. Can't remember, this is like 5 years ago, but if you played back then, that was the usefulness of molten armaments, was that in essence gave everybody a little bit. It wasn't like this ridiculous amount of damage, it was like a little bit, a little smidge of extra damage to everybody that it buffed. It was a beautiful ability. It was used. This ability has not been used in years. Once they nerfed that portion of the ability, it became entirely useless. Most people used it way back when you could still do heavy attacks for damage. Once they nerfed that, this ability went bye-bye. In my opinion, Stone Giant is a great ability. It's good for burst, and it gives you the minor buffs. The Obsidian Shard, in essence, should have either like an AoE splash. It hits you, and then AoE splashes for a portion of the healing, because in essence, risk reward is reduced. Excuse me, the risk reward for this ability, it can be blocked, it can be reflected, and it can be dodged. And when it gets dodged or reflected, either by currently wings, or by the sword and shield alt, or by defensive stance, or by absorb, or if you're a the warden and you're using, you know, shimmering, it absorbs it, and then it gives you nothing. It doesn't stun your opponent, it doesn't heal anybody, it does nothing. And so for the risk reward, especially for how expensive it is, again, like I say, Magdk abilities are ridiculously expensive. 4K for that heal. It's on par with Breath of Life, but it's like 30+% stronger than Breath of Life. And of course it only heals one person, and it can be dodged. So if it gets dodged, it does nothing. You just wasted 4,000 magic. You didn't CSO nobody, you didn't heal nobody. So what you could do is you could give it so that when it would reduce the cost, but to make it a little bit more reward worthy is make it heal you for full, and then maybe like 30% or 33% or 50% of to like up to an additional 2 people who are within range of you. So decrease the range, because the further away that you use this ability, the more risk you're taking. So if you were to do that, you could in essence make the heal based off of the distance, where it's like, you know, it's like 8K from a point, you know, point blank, and then it scales like up to, you know, 50% at max range. So it's at least to have a more risk reward for someone who like wants to theory craft a Magdk healer. But in essence, there's so many better options to giving DK more damage instead of going the route of Molten Whip and nerfing DK heals, which in my experience DKs struggle to heal because the heals are just too expensive, which is typically why you see most DKs run Cauterize over things like Coag, because 2 ticks of Cauterize do more than the one of Coagulating Blood, and it costs the same, right? If you look at Flames of Oblivion, it's 2160 times 2, that's 4320, right? Costs the exact same amount, but 2 ticks do 9,000 health, and then you get another 2 ticks after that. So it's much cheaper to run Cauterize than it is to run Coag, which is why most DKs don't run Coag and they run Cauterize. So there's so many better options for changing Magdk, making it more viable, not necessarily in 1v1, but in scenarios where the DK finds itself surrounded. And that's just this one Magdk opinion. I've been playing Magdk since release. I've got about 5 years of experience playing it. I stream Magdk very often. When I stream pretty often. Feel free to check me out at MGTOW Gamer on Twitch, and feel free to give me a like and a follow. Hit me up in the comment sections. Let's get this discussion going. Take care, thank you, and God bless.